Anymore now, you can buy just about anything you want online, from cars to coffee makers to speakers. Well, what if I told you that Emotiva got its start over 20 years ago exclusively selling speakers online? Hi, I'm Matt, this is the Ohm Audio channel, and today we are talking about the Emotiva B1 Plus bookshelf loudspeaker. Coming in at a price point of $249 from Emotiva's website, the B1 Plus bookshelf loudspeaker really does represent an excellent value for the money. And that's partially because that Emotiva sells it directly from their website and nowhere else. You're not going to find it on Amazon, you're not going to find it through a dealer network. And because of that, they can put more money into the product development and to the product parts quality in order to offer a more competitive product, how many times can I say product in one sentence, at its given price point and even a little bit higher. So for your $249, what are you getting? Well, Emotiva with their Aeromotive line exclusively uses a folded ribbon tweeter that is of their own design. Folded ribbon tweeters are a departure from your standard dome type of tweeter, not only in the looks department, but also in the sound signature that they provide, which we'll discuss later. You also get a 5 1/4 inch woven fiber woofer with this hexagonal beauty ring. On the back, there is a flared port to extend the bass response down to a claimed 48 hertz, 5-way gold-plated binding posts with plastic screw caps, and of course the Emotiva label with serial number. Also with the front baffle, you'll notice that there are some angles that are cut into it at the edges here and on the corners. This not only kind of gives a particular look that I think kind of reminds me a little bit of the F-117 stealth bomber, but also is supposed to help a little bit with edge diffraction effects and improve the imaging of the speaker. Now, one thing you're not going to be able to tell by looking at the speaker is the material that the cabinet is made out of. Most manufacturers are going to be using medium density fiberboard, mostly because it's easy to work with, it's inexpensive, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. Also, it's very cheap. High density fiberboard, which they are using to build the cabinet, is more expensive. However, it comes with some benefits. It's heavier, it's tougher, and also because it moves the cabinet resonance into a higher frequency range. The reason why you would want something like that is when your woofer is playing a mid-range frequency and the energy that's going into the cabinet from the woofer is not going to excite the side panels the same as if it was made from medium density fiberboard, which resonates at a lower frequency and more easily than a high density fiberboard cabinet would be. And speaking of playing, let's talk about my listening impressions.
I can't hear you! It's too dark in here!
The tonality of these speakers is something I enjoyed immensely when listening to them. Starting with the bass response. For a 5 1/4 inch speaker, the bass extension on this is perfectly adequate. I don't have any complaints as far as how low the speaker can play. Yes, you're going to want to put a subwoofer with the speaker if you really want to get the most out of it and cross it over. But for the majority of my listening sessions, I didn't feel the need for having a subwoofer in any of the situations that I listened to. As far as texture and tone of the speaker, when it comes to bass, was good, but not great. One of my favorite tracks to listen for this is Endless Fields' Wolfhead in the album Alive in the Woods. In that track, an upright bass is being played fairly aggressively, and it's a good way to see if you're going to hear all the little micro details of that upright bass as it's being played. For this speaker's case, we hear the fundamental notes, we hear a little bit of the resonance of the bodies, but not all the details of the string as the bow's dragging across are felt or really present when playing on the speaker. So it's a good speaker for that, but it's not the best I've heard. Now, moving into like mid-bass regions where you're listening to toms, kick drum fundamentals, and so forth, this speaker does a very good job of it. Kick drums have a nice impact to them and a feeling to them, especially when driven hard. They offer good body for the toms. You can hear the cabinet of the toms being played. Lower register male vocals that have a little bit of richness to them. But again, not the best I've heard, but still very good. Moving out of the mid-bass into the mid-range region, there is a little bit of an elevation in that mid-range response. And that elevated mid-range is going to help a lot with speech intelligibility and certain instruments. One thing I really enjoyed on this actually is brass instruments. I was watching John Williams live in Vienna. The brass section was absolutely phenomenal sounding on these speakers throughout that entire recording. Things like snare drums are going to have a lot more impact because of the elevated region, which is something I actually quite enjoy. Moving past mid-range and into upper mid-range and treble, starting to get into this tweeter's performance, that's where this speaker really kind of sets itself apart from other speakers with a more traditional dome tweeter. Just the treble and upper mid-range performance of the speaker is almost palpable in the way it's presented. Things like cymbal hits, the plucking of guitar strings, the breath of a singer when they take a breath in is all just added with a little bit more detailed and nuance that just it makes it so much more interesting to listen to when you've listened to much more traditional, more laid-back type of a speaker. But I don't want you to mistake that added detail for something that's considered shouty. Now, when pushed hard, these speakers can get a little bit on the sibilant side, and that is kind of a characteristic of folded ribbon tweeters. Now, what I mean by sibilant is like things like a cymbal or S's when singing. Instead of a nice soft or sharp S sound, it's more of an SH sound. And that's because of the distortion as the material of the tweeter starts to resonate or starts to have a little bit of a breakup mode. Now, in this particular speaker, it's fairly well controlled and it's never super offensive, but it is there, and some people are much more sensitive to it than others. Me personally, I didn't find it that offensive, but your mileage may vary depending on how sensitive you are to that type of a distortion. When listening to music that has a lot of synthesizer, electronic type music, these tweeters are absolutely phenomenal. The detailed retrieval they have is just laser accurate. So if you want to hear the details, these speakers are going to do it for you. However, you got to be careful with some of your electronic pairings, because if you have a amplifier or a DAC, or if your music source has a lot of distortion in it, either from compression or, if it's just not a great piece of equipment, these tweeters are going to tell you about it. Alright, so let's talk about Soundstage and Imaging.
Where'd that come from?
Soundstage and Imaging on these speakers is a little bit of a mixed bag. So while I was sitting here talking and ranting and raving about these tweeters and how they sound and how cymbals decay on forever and you can retrieve all kinds of details, they come at a bit of a cost. The thing about folded ribbon tweeters or air motion transform is that they have a really difficult time disappearing into the room. What I mean by that is that when you properly place these speakers in a room to a point where you cannot locate the speaker by closing your eyes, listening to music, and saying, there's a speaker right there, the tweeters call attention to themselves. Now, they're not sitting there shouting at you saying, I am a tweeter right here. They definitely will say, hey, yeah, I'm still here. Don't forget about me. So if you're someone that really likes to have a speaker that just will completely disappear into a room, these probably aren't going to be the ones for you. Now, I will say, when you place these speakers a little bit closer to a wall, in my case, about 2 feet away from the front wall or back wall, I guess you could say, while the soundstage depth wasn't enormous, it was very consistent to where the tweeters calling out to themselves wasn't nearly as offensive as when I had these speakers further out into the room to increase the depth of the soundstage. Now, soundstage width on the speakers, regardless of how I place them, was fantastic. The size of the soundstage that could be projected left and right of the speaker was really quite impressive, even in a less than an ideal and listening environment like it is here in my basement. Now, as far as imaging goes, the speakers image phenomenally. So placements of instruments and singers within the soundstage is excellent. Center image, when the recording has it, is absolutely rock solid centered. One of my favorite tracks to listen to for this is Noah Wall's Death Has No Mercy, where it is a binaural recording in a church. So there's a lot of ambience in the room and instruments placed around this binaural microphone, and you can very clearly define where the instruments are in the recording, as well as the singer as she naturally sways back and forth while singing, and you can kind of pick up those details in the recording. So it's a very nice speaker to listen to for that reason. Now that we're done with our listening impressions, let's take a look at some measurements. Okay, now it's time to take a look at the measurements for the B1 Plus. Looking at the response, it actually looks very good. There are no major deviations from the response, no major spikes, no major dips anywhere. If we overlay a box that represents a plus or minus 3 decibel frequency response, you'll notice that pretty much the entirety of the frequency response for the speaker falls within this plus minus 3 decibels. It doesn't necessarily represent that this is a neutral speaker, because it certainly isn't when we are talking in our listening impressions, but it is a well-designed speaker. Now, one thing that is interesting to note is that Emotiva on their website says that this is a 48 hertz bass frequency response on the speaker. Now, when we take a look at where the bottom of the box intersects our frequency response line, you'll notice that the F3, which is 3 decibels down from the mean average, is around 75 hertz. Sometimes manufacturers will claim their F10, which is 10 decibels down from the mean average, but even that, the F10 for me was about 53 hertz. So it's very possible that they were using this F10 measurement, or perhaps they were using an in-room measurement for the bass response. If anyone from Emotiva happens to see this and might want to clarify on where they're getting the 48 hertz claim, that would be greatly appreciated. Now, the next thing we're going to take a look at is the horizontal response. Horizontal response is when we take the microphone in front of the tweeter of the speaker and then placing the speaker on a turntable, rotate the speaker at 10-degree increments. And those lines on this chart represent each one of those 10-degree shifts, starting with black, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and finally violet, which is at 60 degrees either left or right of the speaker. And for the most part, the speaker response here is very good. There's no major nulls or dips or very large spikes in the response as we move off axis. However, there is one area I would like to point out. Between 4 kilohertz and 8 kilohertz, a number of the frequency responses do bunch up a little bit. And this will come into play when we take a look at the in-room response that I measured. We'll take a few of these lines out for better clarification. And you can see that the on-axis 10, 20, and 30 degree marks, all between about 3 kilohertz and 9 kilohertz, are practically at the same response level. So that energy that is reflecting off the walls between the 0 and 30 degree marks is about the same. So this, I think, bodes well for home theater use, which I found it, of course, very, very nice in a home theater setting. Now, next, we're taking a look at the vertical response. So in this case, we are laying the speaker flat on the turntable, placing the microphone at the tweeter level, and then rotating speaker to simulate the microphone raising above the speaker. And here we do see that the response is a little bit more crowded and confusing to look at than the horizontal response, and that's fairly typical for a two-way design in the vertical response. Again, there are no major deviations from the response. However, there is some problems right around the 10 and 20 degree mark where we have a fairly significant dip right around 3 kilohertz to the tune of about 15 decibels. So you will notice this if you have the speaker placed lower than you, say if it's on like a TV stand that's low to the ground and you're in a standing position, or if you're sitting on a bar stool at like a bar top, you will notice that dropout right around the 3 kilohertz range. And also it'll make some kind of an effect from the ceiling bounce as well. But if you have a room that's fairly well treated, this is not as much of an issue. And again, we're seeing a bit of a bunching up around that 4 to 9 kilohertz region in the vertical response. Now, the last one we're going to take a look at for the responses is the negative response. So this again is simulating as we were to move below the speaker. So if the speaker was placed well above you, say like as a height channel, or if you have this mounted on a ceiling high up, this is kind of representative of the sound you'll hear. And again, the same lines as before: black, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet at 60 degrees. And you'll notice that there is one fairly significant dropout here around the negative 30 degree mark, which is centered around 3200 hertz. This would be something you would notice if you were sitting well below the speaker. And also at the 50 and 60 degree mark, we do have some dropouts that break away from the other trend lines between 5 and 9 kilohertz. Now, talking about the in-room response, this is going to be representative of what you're actually hearing in the room, with the effect of the room and the loss of output from the speaker as you get further away from it. Now, in this case, in my room, the speaker was placed about 6 feet away from a wall on this right. The left side was an open into the room, and the behind the speaker was about 4 feet from the nearest wall. The microphone was placed about 4 feet from the speaker, so a little bit over 1 meter, and this is the response I get. Now, when looking at an in-room response, you want to look for a gradual line that just gently lowers as you go up in frequency range. What you want to look for in an in-room response is any major deviation from this trending line, anywhere where it rises very dramatically or drops very dramatically. And for the most part, the speaker does a fairly good job of staying within that trending line. Obviously, in the lower frequencies, you see a lot more undulations in light, but that's almost exclusively because of the room. The room interacts with bass and mid-bass far more than it does with the upper frequency ranges. The one thing I do want to note is that from about the 4 kilohertz range, rising up to about 8 kilohertz, you'll notice that the line, instead of running parallel to our in-room response target line, it actually flattens out and then raises back up to intersect the line and go above the line. And this is part of what the brightness that I think a lot of people are noting on the speaker when reviewing it or listening to it. This is a range that adds to that bit of presence and brilliance. So things like the plucking of strings and fundamentals of cymbals and so forth will be falling in this range. And because that the off-axis energy was out there and at a higher level than the rest of the frequencies, this adds to the in-room response. And so it's not necessarily a knock against the speaker, it's just a characteristic of the speaker. And the last measurement we're going to take a look at is the impedance. Now, Emotiva rates this as an 8 ohm speaker. However, the speaker does dip down to as low as 4.3 ohms in the mid-bass region. So this is something you might want to take into consideration when pairing this with your electronics.
Can you, shut up?
Alright, so what are my final thoughts? My final thoughts are, these speakers are an absolute blast to listen to. They're detailed without being shouty, they're forward without being offensive, and they can fill a room with sound far better than a speaker of this size should be able to. Give it good electronics, give it some good signals, and these things are going to really impress you in what they can do for their price of only $249. These are honestly some of my favorite speakers to listen to, especially when I want to listen to something that's a little bit more exciting. They're fun. These are a fun speaker. Are they neutral? No. Are they the end-all be-all in accuracy? No. But first and foremost, music listening should be fun. It should be something that we enjoy. And if you enjoy a speaker that has just a little bit more excitement, a little bit more forwardness to it, this is a very good speaker for that. It's not going to be offensive at any point. You might find the tweeter a little bit sibilant if you're sensitive to that sort of thing. I personally wasn't. Some people are. And only you can tell whether or not you're sensitive to that. And Emotiva has a fairly generous return policy if you get the speaker and you just don't particularly care for it. And that is it. That is our review of the Emotiva B1 Plus, a bookshelf loudspeaker. What do you guys think? Please let me know down in the comments section below. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up. If you haven't, please consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification icon to let you know when new videos are released. We are on Patreon at patreon.com/ohmaudio channel. Hop on there, see if any of those subscriptions make sense to you. And until then, guys, be good to your ears.